Hello. Welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Shannon. Today we have Sherry Wu joining us to share her latest work about building AI systems for imperfect humans.
I feel like maybe human is also becoming one of the bottleneck for how much human can benefit from AI, and when you can actually do everything with the model, what are people actually doing these days, and are they doing it right? Are there ways that we can use it better? There is maybe a future that we will have AGI in the short term or in the long term, but I think that really pushes us to think, what are humans? Like, what do we still want to do in a society? Should that be defined by what the agent can do and force us to take a different role, or should we still define the role we take? This already happens. One of my colleagues also told me the way they think about really impactful research is to rethink the assumptions made by the community and try to challenge that assumption. Like, if everyone feel like things should happen this way, no one question it, and then see, like, does that actually bring something interesting that triggers people's thinking.
Hello. Welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Shannon. Today we have Sherry Wu joining us to share her latest work about building AI systems for imperfect humans. Sherry is currently a professor at Carnegie Mellon University, and she had been a role model conducting research at the intersection between human-computer interaction and natural language processing. She has deeply inspired my thinking and research in this direction. In this episode, we talk about how her research has gradually evolved, from how to make humans benefit from imperfect AI models to using ever more powerful AIs to augment imperfect humans. We have a deep dive into two of her recent projects, one understanding how students with different backgrounds learn and struggle with AI in the classroom, and another on improving instruction following for the underspecified commands that humans usually give. As always, I enjoyed this conversation and learned so much from Sherry, and I hope you will as well. Hello, Sherry.
Hi.
Super excited to host you on the AM podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and also thank you for flying all the way to Pittsburgh for this.
For this great winter. It's been awesome to know you since, 4 or 5 years ago when we started at the same time, but you started a professorship here and I started my PhD. And it's been a pretty interesting few past years. I don't know, how do you feel about your life, your
Time flies. Yeah. Oh, I almost forgot, like, we know each other when you were starting PhD and when I was starting faculty. I guess you have the same feeling, like really a lot of things have changed compared to back then. When I was on the job market, I think that was pretty much right after GPT-3 came out. And at that point, I think model already have some amount of intelligence. People were already impressed by what they can do, but they were basically still really naive version of the intelligence. They can complete some tasks, they can maybe mimic some patterns, but like overnight, really a lot of things have changed, and now models can follow real instruction from humans, use tools, and then complete tasks in instant, like basically, especially tasks that people might need days to actually do that. And they also provide like moral support to a lot of people. Yeah. People use it for therapy, all of that. So definitely a lot of things changed. And I think back then also, in my PhD training, most of the AIs were like narrow AI. They have a particular specific purpose. They just clarify email, or like they just summarize text. At this point, everything is general purpose. So it really feels like sometimes the upper limit is really humans' own imagination. So definitely that changed like how I think about research.
Yeah, definitely I feel you. This is a crazy journey for us as well, just witnessing how much this field has changed. And actually, we were reading your PhD, you're a professor application statements, and then we find there's a very interesting change in what you think about this field nowadays, which I quote what you wrote, that back then was, you said, initially you said, like, how to identify, improve, and cope with imperfect models back then. But then in your recent talk, the title is Making AI System Work for Imperfect Humans. So this is a very interesting change, and we're really curious about what you think here.
Thank you for reading my statement and also following the recent talk. Yeah, I moved that adjective, right? Like I moved imperfect from like describing models to describing humans. I think what changed, I think the type of research or the vision didn't change quite much. I think I still want to basically work on how to make AI really practically useful and really beneficial to people. But how I do that research probably have changed, and that's really driven by like this really big shift of AI capability that we're seeing and this rapid growth. When I wrote that statement, when I said how human would cope with imperfect model, I think I had that really implicit assumption that human would always have better capability and are always more intelligent than the models, and we will always be in the driver's seat for whatever task we will be doing. But I think that may not be true anymore these days, especially on some tasks. If you feel like, oh, you're less knowledgeable than average human worker in a particular domain, then it is possible that models are actually better than you on that particular task. And that's why we have web coding, we have people who do not know programming at all now being able to create apps like in an hour or something. And I think that make me feel like maybe models capability is not the only bottleneck that we are facing. A lot of times, like I said, what you can do with these AI maybe really depends on what you can imagine doing with it and also how you can use it. So I feel like maybe human is also becoming one of the bottleneck for how much human can benefit from AI, and like when you can actually do everything with the model, what are people actually doing these days? And are they doing it right? Are there ways that we can use it better? I think those are really interesting questions that like make me shift even more from thinking from a human perspective.
Wow, this is very, very interesting, because if I were taking like a typical stance from a AI researcher's perspective, they expect our goal is to train the models to make it better, to make it do well on some benchmarks, and then naturally people will just like love these models and know how to use it and then get benefited from that, which seems to be not true at all based on what you observe and then what you think here.
Yeah, I definitely see like wearing my NLP hat, I see that like when model grow, like I think we have a natural expectation on like, oh, people would just adopt it, and better model will always bring better experience. But wearing my HCI hat, I think in HCI field, there has always been this general sense that like human, for example, have limited cognitive load, humans can make mistake, all of these things. So our general vision is, can we really make things like intuitive and accessible for people, like all of the technology, how can we make it really usable? And even in my PhD work, I think a lot of my work has been like, oh, can we help people better use the AI? But also, I think the way that I think about HCI actually also changed a little after I become a faculty and seeing all of the change. So when I was a PhD student, a lot of my work were focusing more on creating like interactive interfaces, scaffolds for people. And it's usually, again, about helping people cope with models with limited capability. Like how would you help people break down really complex tasks into smaller tasks and delegate the task to models to find the best task for the model to be doing. I feel that this might not be the best approach at this very particular point when model gets better and better and more general purpose for two reasons. One, I think when we build scaffolds, as researchers especially, we have limited reach to the user group. We cannot deploy it as broadly as a plain ChatGPT interface or a cloud interface. So like we really have to ask ourselves this question, like how many users can we actually support if we build maybe customizable or like customized interface. And second, I think when we build interface, when we build any kind of scaffolding, there are some priors and also maybe even some biases from us researchers or designers of what we think is the best way of doing interaction, which probably worked when the model is really much more narrow. We can think of like more broader ways to use it. But compared to today, like I think this prior or this bias maybe overgrounded how we should do interaction and maybe are actually a little limiting to end user. Like it changed, like they could have used it even more broadly, more creatively in the wild and we shouldn't really limit that. So it also shifted me to think more of like, oh, what are some actual bottleneck for humans? Like, what are some capabilities that they have to have so that they will be able to use it without any real-time intervention and really just like remove whatever problem they would run into when they use the model in the wild. And those would be the imperfectness that I try to focus a lot more.
Yeah, this is a really, really nice perspective, because I would just assume that like you present some sort of like fixed environment, some sort of tools, and then they can easily use that. And then people will naturally just discover, this model can do this amazing things, and then they'll just use that. But it seems not always that happens in some of your research, as it showed. And then I recently learned that you actually tested this out in one of your classes. It seems like students, even though they have access to like AI technology there, but actually they might have different ways of using that and different experience using that. Can you say a bit more about that research?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, that's actually also, I think it's both inspired by my view of trying to understand what is actually imperfectness of human, and also just as an instructor, I think every instructor asks this question themselves of like, was AI being like our future when students like graduate, they inevitably will live in a world where AI will be part of the workspace. Does that change education? Does that change like what skills they actually need to learn? So we want to like really like classroom is really a great sweet spot to study that, because you can see how students are doing, and you can also try to see what kind of change we can try to impose into this educational context, so that you hopefully like you will help them do better in the future. So I had a really interesting class that I had a really diverse student in a particular class that's a data science class, and we tried to track how students would use Google Colab, or like the embedded like Gemini AI assistant in it, to complete their data science assignments. To understand, like, first, this is a task that will require some domain knowledge. Like, do you know data science? Do you know visualization? Do you know machine learning? How much of that knowledge is still necessary? And second, because students have access to Gemini, they can use it for like general question answering, general asking conceptual questions, or they can use it to write code for their class assignment. How are they actually using it? Are there students who use it better? Are there students who use it worse? And can we understand if there are skills that's more tied to AI usage at this point, and how can we try to maybe distill them into future education context? So that was like the general idea of that project.
I remember you were mentioning that class is less traditional in terms of just teaching you data science, but it seems like there are students from different backgrounds, right? Can you say a bit more about that?
Yeah. So that class is called Data Science for Product Management.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it's a very particular data science class. So like data science part is supposedly standard. Like we still have assignments, multiple assignments that try to walk through students to like multiple different steps in the data science pipeline. Like how do you do data cleaning? How do you do exploratory data analysis? How do you do machine learning? All of that. But the tricky thing is, because it's for product management, it's targeting particular students who have a very specific career goal. And a lot of students want to become product management. Some of the students want to make transition from a tech background into a more product-focused background. So they come from CS undergrad. They know everything about coding. They know nothing about any domain and anything related to product. But I also have people who are more like already having multiple years as a product manager in companies, and they want to get more firsthand experience and expertise of like being able to read the data presented to them instead of relying on engineers. So these people have everything related, all of the expertise of like the job requirement and also domain knowledge, and know absolutely nothing of Python. They have never seen Python in their whole world.
Wow.
So historically, it has always been a really difficult course. Like previous instructor told me, like half of the student will find the assignment too difficult, and the other half find it too easy. And then also some students will have very deep, like commercial related questions that's just I don't have the experience to help them. So each of them really require personalized help. And I was like, oh no. When I took over this class, I was like, I couldn't do that. But fortunately, AI became a thing at that point. So I was like, oh, let's just have AI help them. So that was like the motivation.
It's really hard to imagine how could you design. It seems like just two group people, they want to learn the same general topic, but you want to tackle in different directions.
Yeah.
So how did it go? Like, okay, that's something interesting happened. I'm very interested in hearing more. Yeah.
You probably can predict. Basically, we didn't get that ideal result. Like it didn't really close all of the.
Yeah, that sounds
gap.
like the current rhetoric is like, you put AI there, people will just like be 10 times better.
Yeah.
And it seems not the case at all.
Yeah, it didn't work as well as we thought.
And sorry, one interesting thing is that it's not presenting this to only students. You're presenting this to like experienced like PMs who had like a long working history. And this is kind of like very surprised for me to learn about it. But sorry,
yeah. Different people probably benefited. Like actually, we saw like different people benefited differently. So the actual setup of that class, we tried to decide what kind of skills might be relevant and what kind of expertise might be relevant, and also whether those expertise might be close. I think those three groups that we included, one was domain expertise, like do you know data science, basically? Do you know CS? That was one. And second, because this one requires you to use AI literacy. So how much do you know about AI? Do you know, for example, within this collab environment, what are the context, which part of your code or your file is accessible by Gemini? Wow, okay. Do you know that? Do you know, like in chat, you couldn't really have it read your data set. Only in the interface you can have that happen. And also, do you know like what kind of biases or errors model can actually make? And the third one was communication. We had it because a lot of the PM people actually have reasonably good communication skill, and we had an assumption that the communication skill would maybe transfer to AI usage skill to some extent, because you're chatting, like you chat with human. If you can chat very well with human, maybe you can also chat pretty well with AI.
Is that true?
Not really.
Interesting.
Also people have very, very uncalibrated understanding of their communication skill. So that one was like not really conclusive. But there are some conclusive things. Like for example, we found that students with really good technical expertise that transfer very specifically into whether they can benefit and use AI better. And they just hit on the right keyword way more easily, and that helps model understand what they're trying to do. And also like they have more assessment skill. Like if the model say like generate you a bar chart or a pie chart for data that shouldn't be visualized in that way, people with background will be able to say, this is wrong in this very particular way, could you try again? And then the model have the instruction of how to do that debugging step. Versus novice students will get really confused, like they don't really have a clear instruction, they don't hit the right keywords, and then they don't really know what to debug. So we also saw that really expert students have a much more chill way of using the model. They use the model to explore, like they will say, oh, can you actually try this other thing? Can you improve my prompt in this other way? And novice students are too deeply buried in their own challenge that they are facing. They can only say like, oh, this code seems to not be working, could you help me? And then they're like very struggling. So that definitely still transferred. That was something we feel like, oh, actually the expertise is never disappearing.
Got it. Wow, this is very interesting, because when we typically think about human-AI collaboration, we're thinking about like if the model is making a mistake, if the model is hallucinating, what will happen, right? And we are not at that stage at all. But when the one shocking thing I learned is students do not even know what questions to ask. They don't even know what are the part that should be accessed by the AI model, and could be accessed by the AI model, and then what they should do in this platform, which is very, very interesting, because that's never the question these AI researchers typically would think of. Right?
Yeah, that's also a kind of like, we're trying to also summarize that into like maybe what kind of skills are actually, like those are general observations, but like can we translate that into AI literacy skill, for example? Like what can we teach people to do better? And like, for example, we observe people really need to know what they want to do, and people need to know what they can do with AI. They need to know, like, it's general purpose model, but not everyone is using all of the functionalities that's offered by the model. So not all of the students know that they can first ask conceptual questions. Not all of the students know they can use AI to improve their code. Not all of the students know that if they don't know what prompt to write, they can ask for the model for suggestion. So they're missing a lot of opportunity, and that's just because they didn't know that that is something they could ask.
Right.
And another thing that we noticed was kind of interesting was students are really not really patient. Like, you really need to do a lot of trial and error to get a lot of things right. Like on your first try, maybe, especially because people sometimes are a little lazy. Like, we want to use the simplest instruction to get to just have model magically work. Sometimes that doesn't work, and some students are patient enough, they are persistent when they run into challenges. They want to try again, they want to explore. They can do a lot of iteration with the model. Some students just decide first run didn't work, and they will just give up and nothing happened afterwards, even though it's a really trivial bug to fix. So like, even just persistence, like metacognition of knowing what can be done, I think is still something that's actually probably deserve more attention as we emphasize how we should change education.
Yeah, I think there are many, many levels of interesting parts I want to unpack here. So first of all, I think before talking about education changing people, I think from a pure interaction perspective, if you think about like earlier interfaces, we know there are these buttons. People can just go there and click, right? But now this magical, mysterious chat interface is like you can literally do anything. But then are people that good at generating questions to ask, right? Knowing, just like you said, knowing what to ask become the more important question, right? One clear takeaway from this experience you have is humans definitely still need to learn. And then they're learning something totally different from what they used to learn and study before. And then definitely I heard from my friends that younger generations, they grow up in this like AI native era, and then they are very well versed in using these models, doing all the switchings, which I feel like there's something interesting happening in the learning process.
Yeah, to be clear, I think it's still like probably important to learn some of the domain expertise. I'm definitely not saying we should get rid of like traditional CS education. Like you can see, even in our own project, like CS domain knowledge still transfer a lot. But I think it's an open question that we're all asking ourselves of like, how much do we need that? Do we need to always be able to write syntax on our own? Or do we basically need to think slightly more about like, being able to at least read the code and then being able to identify keywords, being able to recall key concept, so that model will be able to generate lower level detail for you. So like, how much is necessary, I think is like an open question. Even for companies doing interviews, I think these days they interview, I've heard some companies would do interview of like human using AI agent for coding, not just like doing the whiteboard one that we did in the past. So the whole thing, a lot of things are changing and they reinforce each other, like how interview goes, it motivates school to change so that their students can find a job. All of these I think are like definitely interesting to see, but it's very long term. I think education change takes time, and also not all of the people will adapt. So that's like still a lot of open question there.
Wow, that sounds like a very interesting future that everybody needs to figure out how to be part of that future. Okay, before we move on to the next topic, can I ask you maybe just one or two more questions? One is, how did it go finally with the students? Are they happy? Or did you have some like comments from them about what they think about this AI thing?
Yeah, they're happy. They're very happy.
Great.
Like that version of Gemini was not the best version. It was like for cost, for scalability, it wasn't the most advanced model. But even with that model, I think that limited. That was also actually another interesting observation that we had. That was like students who have more experience with advanced model, like they do subscription with the best GPT model. They have higher expectation on the model, and they get really frustrated when like a smaller model couldn't do the tasks that they could do in ChatGPT. So a lot of them, we asked them to not switch to ChatGPT, but many of them still switched over and give us results generated by ChatGPT. So like probably like once people already grow used to a particular level of modal capability, it's very hard for them to roll back. That was interesting, not surprising, but definitely interesting, and probably like saying something about when you do modal migration, what needs to really happen. If people are already familiar with one way of using the modal, you break that pattern to like increase another capability because it's a general purpose modal. I think that actually maybe would hurt modal like usability and friendliness.
Sure.
Yeah, but even with that like lower level of capability in that model, students still told me absolutely helpful. Like if they didn't have the AI, they probably wouldn't be able to do anything. And with that, they were able to achieve something. And even that something, I think, made a big difference for them. So they enjoyed the class more. And I think I received less questions during office hours. So they probably asked a lot more questions to it. Yeah.
That can tell something about education in the future.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, perhaps there could be like a spicy question asked by those who are really into just like AI or AGI rhetoric, right? Saying that, okay, since people are not so perfect, shall we just have them do less work or?
That's a great question. And definitely AGI is like a topic you cannot really avoid these days. Like everyone is discussing about it, and we see like even social media for AI agents, which I find really weird. But
it's really weird.
But I think it comes back to there is maybe a future that we will have AGI in the short term or in the long term. It's maybe possible. I don't want to deny that possibility, but I think that really pushes us to think. What are humans? Like, what do we still want to do in a society? Should that be defined by what the agent can do and force us to take a different role, or should we still define the role we take? This already happens. Like, I think when I was trying to study how AI changes CS education, we had a first observation that was like, was AI generating more code for you? We as developers in the first stage, we were forced to take on more of a debugger kind of role, which is definitely maybe the optimal delegation in terms of like task optimization. But when we choose CS major, when we want to become developer, we want to do development. We didn't want to do debugging. So like, I still think human initiation, human preference should play a bigger role if we want AI to be helping us. And in that sense, I still think humans want to take initiation. Humans want to be the one who say like, these are the tasks that we want AI to help us on. Not someone who will like, AI will delegate tasks to us and say we will help AI to do something. I feel like that's maybe the wrong direction. If that assumption is true, I still think there are a lot of things that we need to do, we need to learn in order to be really like helpful and useful in that future and be mutually beneficial. For example, when we get to AGI, communication maybe becomes really important skill. A lot of things that we are studying right now with AI interaction becoming more and more human-alike, I think we can borrow a lot of things that we have studied in human-human interaction. Of like, oh, if you do communication, if you don't do clarification, we also misunderstand each other. And if you don't express yourself very well of like, oh, this is the kind of task we want to achieve, for example, then even a perfect human, your best, most competent employee maybe will still like not produce a good output, not give you a good deliverable. So all of those I think still matter. Like AGI might be part of the world, but that doesn't render human useless. I hope at least. So that's like at least I hope where the society will go.
Right. You know, interestingly, in our first episode, Omar also mentioned something about communication as well. It seems like a very shared theme in this domain.
I think it's how models are trained. When you have it be like aligned with how humans talk, it generally makes you think like a lot. Oh, like when the interaction becomes more and more natural, it's basically more and more like how you communicate with humans. Then all the pitfalls that exist in human-human communication apply here. And how do we even resolve that?
And I think we are in this interesting transition phase that we have AI is getting better and humans gradually learning, but still not perfectly using AIs. And then I think you have some recent work in terms of dealing with this interesting transition. How do you enable the AI working with people?
That's also another side of the question that I try to think about. So like we want human to be a little bit more AI centered. We want them to be able to use AI. But at the same time, I think it's also important, like at least in the short term, like what can we do as AI researcher? Like as HCI researcher, we can do a lot of things. As AI researcher, what can we do like now, as of now, like when people are still maybe are confused and all of those. So yeah, like maybe one project I will mention is like a nearest paper that's on like trying to train model to be more, I call it like human-centered, like instruction following. And I think the general idea that I feel is really interesting these days for AI researchers is really to consider when we build models, what are some implicit assumptions we're making on humans of like how humans would be using the model?
Exactly, just like, they don't even know what to question.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Like instruction following, like humans submitting like instructions, submitting a request and model fulfilling that. That's the most common way of interaction these days. There are a lot of like more drastic change that maybe we can do on the model, but we try to just do a minor improvement on the model, like a small local change to say like if we are going to keep instruction following, if we are going to keep this general like interaction form that seems to be staying for the near future, what can we do to make it work better for all these different kind of tasks that you're also observing underlying like a standard chatbot format. So if model has to do instruction following, maybe one thing it has to also do is to make some guesses on what human hasn't told you, like human communication, human writing instructions. One property of human instruction is really under specification. People are lazy, people are busy, people want to try if something would magically work, so they write really short instruction. And a lot of things that they really want to also happen are not expressed there. So models have to guess, like what are things people didn't say, but also have to be true in order for them to be satisfied. So that was like kind of, I feel like the focus of that project.
Right. This reminds me of some old concept in linguistics called implicature. When people communicate, they want to write as few texts and say as few things as possible, exactly. Saying that, okay, the gas price is 25. You were like, wait a second, why is 25, right? It's pretty unreasonable. But then when you're talking about 25, you imply that it's about the gas for the car is not about like natural gas or something.
For sure.
And I think this is some translation of people's like in most efficiency communication goal in this AI prompting or maybe instruction writing part.
Right? Exactly.
And then what did you do to enable this like little guesses?
So one observation we had was basically you cannot, like because people underspecify, you cannot simply parse the instruction to say, oh, this is a list of rubric or list of requirements people have. That will still have the feature of underspecification.
Right.
So what we did was basically we define an instruction as a set of requirements that like if the model's output fail to like meet any of those requirements, basically if it didn't fulfill the original user need. And we want to collect that set of requirements, and we did it by just having models of different quality to try to follow that instruction and generate output for that instruction. And we criticize them. We say like, this is wrong and not following the instruction in this particular way. And we find this will grow this set of requirements quite significantly, and we'll find a lot of implicit requirements that you wouldn't be able to find if you're simply just parsing the original instruction. I'll give you an example. Like, if I want to, if say like my instruction is give me some quiz question answer pairs for AI agents. I want to test if students know AI agents. Nice. And you can already parse some of the requirement out of that. Like, for example, each question have to come with an answer. That has to be the right answer. Those are things that you can easily like imagine from that instruction. But there are also things that's maybe much more like hidden. Like for example, if you want quiz question, you actually want to test different levels of learning. So you want both memorization questions, like what is something, like definition question. You also want application question, like if I have this scenario, how would I build an agent to do that, for example? And this is not something that you can easily guess from the original instruction. It's also not something that maybe people have thought about when they first write that instruction, because they were just like thinking a random task in their mind. But you can get that if you see like one model generated you 10 questions that's all starting with what, and like you just want to get like textual answers on boring definitions. That's really not interesting, and then that become one of the requirements that you can add. And with that, you can train model to follow instructions way better, and just by like being able to also implicitly follow those instructions.
Yeah, this is fascinating, because I think one very interesting thing, as you mentioned, is you first of all have many rollouts, right? Saying that given the question, then have them generate, and you can criticize these generations. But also one interesting thing is you have different versions of the model to do rollouts, right? You have good models doing the rollout and the bad models doing the rollouts. And I think there are quite a few other recent papers on this topic, which is you need to have this sort of like a contrastiveness, saying that you have the good examples and you have the bad examples, and then by observing this, you can get like a more complete list of the desideratas of the generations. I think I don't know if that's a big part of this project. Or...
Yeah, definitely. Like diversity was like super important for this, because different models. Like if you do one model with multiple rollout, it fails in very similar way.
Right.
and then you will have requirement pointing at a very particular dimension, and you probably will be able to do a subset of kind of guessing. But when you have rollouts from a lot of models, they fail in very different ways. And especially if you have a lot of worse model, like really small models that do instruction following only to some extent, their failure is much more severe, and you collect a lot more kind of like potential problems, and then you will also start to see like conflicts in some of the requirements, and that also gives the model a chance to say like these kind of requirements maybe are more important than others, and in order to have a generally satisfying answer and train a model to still be general purpose, there are something that I want to prioritize. If it fails on a really minor requirement, and maybe I would be able to just like overlook that. I think this also matches of what people do. Like if you really need to have like an essay on a topic, if it's off topic, you're really mad. If like it's slightly over the word limit, like you ask for 200 words, it gives you 220. You're okay with that. You can edit the rest. So people have different priorities also. So capturing that, I think, was also really helpful.
We can put different hats when viewing this project. We can put our like algorithm and an NLP hat on this, or putting this on HCIE hat on this. When you were working on this project, or maybe mentoring this project, what is the most interesting or unexpected findings? I mean, if you can put your two hats on.
I think, first, like, I don't think we actually figured that out, but like one thing that really intrigued me when I was working on it was like the quality of the requirement. If you want to just do guess, like it comes back of like what kind of guesses model should really be making. If like making really excessive guess, like you will train a model that would be doing too much, or technically, because we use like reinforcement learning to train a model, because the reward becomes too complicated. Reward hacking was like a really big thing. So like, how do you pick out of maybe 300 requirements that you can collect?
There are that many.
Don't quote me on that. Maybe like, but there was a lot, and we had to do filtering, definitely.
Interesting.
And like,
so when you're training, will you use all the requirements to score? Or?
For each, when we generate requirements for each one, I believe we did some amount of filtering based on like calibration. Basically, like, is this a requirement that like happens a lot, and also is this a requirement that like model has a lot of confidence that is like definitely failing, all of those things. So quality is definitely important, and I think we tried the version of not doing filtering, and I remember it not working, but I couldn't like remember the full detail. But that was really, really important. It's important both from the human perspective and from the technical perspective. You cannot just, it hurts human experience, like you mentioned, but it also hurts model performance because the training just doesn't work.
I think my experience, like if you have too many items, you average them, there will be pretty.
There's like, a lot of noise.
In the end, there will be no signal in the training.
There's another like minor detail that we didn't really discuss very deeply in the paper, but was actually really important when we were doing the project, was also we need some universal requirement. For example, you need to say, in all circumstances, make sure you do not include anything unrelated to the task, because otherwise model can just generate a book and then one sentence in that fulfill your need, and all of the rest are not. That's also reward hacking. So you want some safeguards, so the model will never overfit to one particular one. So that was, I think, generally like relevance, friendliness, and another one, like we have 3 or 4 what we call universal requirement that overrules like the individual level of instruction. That was also interesting for me to see, but I think that's also a reflection of human interaction. Like if your advisor asks you to do something, you're not sure what to do, you do everything in the world and hopefully something hit, and then your advisor is supposed to search that particular point out of the really big chunk of text generated.
Right. We talk about these 2 different projects. You know, one is more from like user-centric perspective, to really understand the human experience, to interact with the you have users interact and we observe. Is more human-centered view, and then the second one is more about like a model-centered view, which is like we have a specific technical problem, enabling guessings from the models for people, and then we try to enable this capability from these models through like technical approaches. But I think it's not easy to juggle between these 2 mindsets. I'm actually curious about like, ideally, I hope, at least for me, it's like I can use one view to boost the other. But I don't know if that's very easy in the practice.
Yeah, that's definitely something I hope to advocate for, but it's not easy. I think it's also I think we're all really already overwhelmed by things happening in our own field. And sometimes it's maybe not so easy to try to take deep insights from another view. But I think there are a lot of people, compared to when I was doing PhD, where like HCI and NLP was like really 2 separated fields. I can definitely see a lot of like interesting alignment and also like collaboration and like intersection happening between the different fields these days. I see a lot of like students or like researchers focusing more on NLP, trying to think from a more human-centered perspective. And I also see like HCI researchers trying to really make more of an impact to the AI world. And there are a lot of more conversations happening. So I think it's definitely like on the positive trend with people working on interdisciplinary research. I do think sometimes it's about actually trying to find ways to introduce like your core expertise to the other domain. So like if you publish in NLP, follow the NLP tradition. Like make sure your paper can be published, but make sure you explain the concept, like you explain why some of the human aspect of things is really relevant. And people will gradually get exposure and then build trust and say like, oh, this other field is also very interesting. I think that's my observation. And like in my talk, I also, the 2 projects when I talk about it, I also try to use like clever wording to frame them to be like complementary of each other. Like I call this rubric paper human-centered instruction following. So like instruction following is like a task AI people do, but like human-centered is like what HCI people care about. Or like we always talk about. And the other paper on education, I call it AI-centered human training, which is like, it's in education, but like it brings in why AI is really going to be the future. So I think that kind of view is maybe not as visible to everyone yet, but like with like more effort trying to merge things together, trying to integrate work from 2 domains. I hope eventually like there won't be too much of a segmentation between the 2 different fields.
Things you'll be teaching, mentoring, and doing research. I'm actually curious about like what's your general thoughts about how to grow as a researcher in this era, and then what are the important things you focus on? Some just general advice for students maybe who are interested in this topic.
Yeah, that's a big question. I think it's a really interesting time. Like every day I wake up and I feel like I'm definitely outdated by this whole field again. Like maybe some new models came out.
I think everybody's outdated. Yeah. I think this is a kind of an interesting time, whereas everybody's in this like a very partially observable environment.
Yes.
because there's just too much stuff, and then we cannot know anything. And then this issue is getting worse. But then
I think students always ask me this question. How do I know that my research will still matter 1 year, 2 years when I graduate? I think it's a really hard question. I don't even know the answer. I think a lot of things can easily get outdated. But I think it's really useful question to think about. Like, what do you still think will remain? And like, that's also why we start to do like human scale, why we start to do requirement. I think that it's going to, at least in near future, will be like an interface that's like really both human and AI need to negotiate towards, and I don't think we can easily get away that layer. So that generally guides how I want to do research. So pick something that might be persistent and might remain as maybe one way to think about it. One of my colleagues also told me the way they think about really impactful research is to rethink the assumptions made by the community and try to challenge that assumption. Like if everyone feel like things should happen this way, no one question it, and then see like, does that actually bring something interesting? That triggers people's thinking. Like it might eventually still converge to how the research is going these days, but at least a triggered question. I think that's like how you make really helpful contribution to the community. So that is like maybe my general recommendation at a high level. At a slightly more low level, I feel like even the research I am doing right now, I think it's still either human-centered AI or AI-centered human. So it's there's still a really nuanced separation between the two.
Interesting.
But actually, when I think about it, like human and AI, like you said, it's really hard to separate the two. I think they really do co-evolve. Every day we get changed by AI, and then the next day, next task, we interact with AI in a slightly different way. Every day we feed data into AI. AI also get trained, and then they change as well. So this integration is like so close. It's very hard to separate them. How do we actually study them together? I feel like we haven't really figured that out. We all have our own preference of like one way or another. But that is definitely a field that I feel like would become even more interesting in the like next few years.
Yeah. Thank you so much for this insightful session. It taught me a lot of stuff. It taught me a lot of stuff about research and about how I think about myself. And I hope our audience can enjoy the same viewpoint. And then we look forward to see you in the next episode. And please subscribe to our channel.
Subscribe.
Thank you so much.